Welcome to Let's Race, a journey to educate and eradicate, a teen-produced podcast aiming to educate about the role and impact of race in the United States, with the goal of eradicating systemic racism one step at a time. Each week, I'll be joined by experts specializing in topics concerning race, and they'll share their wisdom on how we can make a change in our community. My name is Elizabeth Choi, and I will be your host for this podcast. Today, I will be joined by Miyako, Aritri, Avril, and Conrad, and I'm so excited to hear all of your perspectives today. Let's start out by introducing ourselves. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm a high school senior.
Hi, my name's Miyako, and I am a rising freshman to UCLA.
Hi, I'm Conrad, and I'm also a rising senior in high school.
Hi, I'm Aritri. I'm a rising sophomore in high school.
Hi, I'm Avril, and I'm also a rising sophomore in high school.
Thank you. It's great to talk to all of you today. So for our first episode, we thought it would be valuable to gain the insight of local teens regarding race experiences. Would anyone like to start out by describing how race has impacted your life in negative or positive ways?
For me, I feel like I've definitely grown up in an area that I'm easily assimilated to. A lot of people are very similar to me, and that's been the same regardless of my home, because everyone's Japanese. And then if I go back to my home country, everyone's Asian. And a lot of people at Irvine are also Asian. So I feel like I haven't experienced enough areas that are diverse enough for me to fully get an experience within my own race that's surrounded by others. So I've had a very neutral experience with it throughout my life, but I know that would change as I keep going out of this city too.
Yeah, I relate to that. Growing up, think most of my schools were completely white. Kindergarten, I was surrounded by white people. First grade is the same thing, some Mexican people. And I really only met the main majority of my Asian friends from middle school. Because even in elementary, there was only a couple other Asian kids. So most of my life, I've been surrounded by white friends and different ethnicities that aren't my own. So I think growing up, I didn't really build a racial identity, I guess, because I didn't really understand what it meant to be Vietnamese Asian, apart from all the restaurants, of course, and visiting family from time to time.
For me, race has been a bit of a larger factor in my life. Well, when I first lived in the East Coast, New York City, it was very diverse. But then when I moved to Arizona, I got into my second choice school, and that one was full of white people, and I was the second Asian kid in the class, and on top of that, I'm Southeast Asian, so I definitely saw some privileges being thrown around to different students. And then also I'm Bangladeshi, but people don't really know where Bangladesh is. So people just always assume I'm Indian right away. And usually when I do correct them, they're like, where is that? So I just accepted Indian as part of my identity, even though that's not really who I am.
I'm happy to have grown up here where there's a lot of diverse people and a lot of communities for all different types of races. So me being Chinese is I don't feel super out of place or anything because there's always there's really large communities of Chinese people here. So I never feel super out of place.
Were any of you born outside of California, outside of the US? Because I was born in California.
Oh yeah, so I was actually going to bring that up. So I think Aritri was born somewhere else, right, in the East Coast, and then I was actually born in Chicago, and I was going to say in Chicago, it was definitely very different from here, and I only lived in Chicago until I was in second grade, but so at that time, I don't think I really developed a sense of what race was. I kind of just viewed all people they're people, but then I think when I did get a little bit older in second grade, I remember there was this one incident where someone accused me of being Chinese, and I'm Korean American, so I didn't take much offense to it because I didn't really understand the implications behind that. But I think looking back, it was definitely like a white majority area. And there are also a lot of black kids at my school. So I think at an early age, like I was definitely exposed to like more white and black populations than Irvine, where I think there is like an Asian and white majority. And I think here I have been really privileged to kind of be surrounded by people who have like a similar culture. And I think that has shaped kind of like the way I've grown up. But I'm glad to have both of those experiences in terms of like races and like different populations.
Yeah, I can agree with that. In New York, so we also had the GATE program there. I was in it, and my class is like super diverse. But then like the other classes, they were majority like the majority were like white students, and they would always give us like dirty looks and all. But yeah, I back then in New York, I lived there until I was 9 years old. So yeah, I just like thought of people as equals, but then after moving to Arizona and like dealing with a bit of racism, that's when I like really understood like, oh, this is actually a problem. And then when I moved to here in the California, it's definitely better than Arizona. Like for example, going a bit into stereotypes, I guess. In my personal experience, like the Southwest Asian community here, they're like super competitive, going for a lot of stereotypes here. So there's that, and then like it was a bit hard for me to like adjust because I'm not that stereotypical of like a Asian kid.
I feel like that's kind of hard for me to relate to because I realize everyone's kind of had different experiences by living in different areas. But I was born in Japan, but I moved here as like a baby. And I've been in Irvine like my whole life since like 2 until now. So I haven't had the experience of obviously, first of all, moving around, which is already really hard, but like also having to experience being around different types of people again. So in that case, that is something I'm kind of worried about as I go forward, go to college and after that, because to me in this city, it feels like, oh, it's normal. Like everyone's Asian. Like there's not that much of racism, but I know once I like leave this city, there's gonna be like a reality check. So yeah, that's nice that you guys, not nice, but um, it's a good experience to have maybe, even though you had to experience some racism as well. So
I remember I was traveling once. I think I went to Arizona too. And then I went into a Denny's and it was everyone was like white and then they like started staring at my family and I was like, wow, this is kind of weird. And I realized like outside of like where we live, it's not like nearly like I didn't take what was here in Irvine was like so like not I guess not the norm. I guess everyone's like there's a lot of Asians. It's very like everyone's really accepting and stuff, but not like maybe in other places not so much. And like when I walked into that Denny's, I was like, wow, this is pretty different.
Yeah, I completely agree because recently, like in the past couple weeks, I went on a trip to like go visit colleges on the East Coast. And like compared to California, there are a lot less Asian people in the East Coast. I've seen a good fair amount of like some Indian people or some other Asians, but like compared to California, it's it's just the only Asian you see, Chinatown, and that's it. Everywhere else is just white as far as the eye can see, I guess.
Yeah, I actually read this one article by an Asian American, I think she was a college student, but she was talking about how she lived in a white majority area. And I guess like there's a stereotype of like the Bay Area teen where it's I think that's also an area with a lot of Asian people. And she was saying how she was jealous that those teens had been able to grow up with like an Asian majority and not feel like an outsider all the time. And I thought that was interesting because even though it's the Bay Area, it also kind of applies to Irvine. And so in a way, I am definitely grateful for being surrounded by an Asian majority. But I think like it's also another point, like what Miyako was saying, because we have been privileged to like be in an Asian majority, we will get a reality check in the future. But yeah, I think both sides, they definitely have a point.
Yeah, I totally agree. But in terms of living, like the disadvantages of living in like not majority Asian, I think there are advantages as to you already grew up in that environment. So you're already, I guess your racial identity gets strengthened in that sense because you learn to take all this, I guess the best word for it is like criticism or on your on your race. So if you take all of these like words against your race, then I guess you grow thick skin and then you can go to different places around the world and you'll be less affected by those words.
Especially since Miyako is going to college, I guess like this is kind of your first opportunity to be surrounded by more racial diversity. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely look forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, I definitely see what Conrad's talking about because, like, I was watching a TED Talk before, and it was like a girl that went to a school that was a lot of like a white majority, but she was like Asian American. And you hear like the stereotypical, like, not stereotypical, but I feel like I hear this story a lot about like, I can't bring curry to school for lunch because like people think it's like poo or whatever. And like I never like related to that. I think I heard about it as like a kid and I was like kind of scared from that idea, but I never experienced that before. I like always bring like Japanese food as lunch and Connor's definitely right about like being able to like embrace your culture really well because like everyone's Asian and everyone's able to embrace it. So in that way, now that I'm gonna go to a more diverse area, I think I'll be able to like be confident in my own culture without having to feel the need to assimilate to others.
Okay, let's transition to our next topic. So, how knowledgeable about race do you consider yourself to be, and what aspects do you want to learn more about?
What does it mean to be knowledgeable about race? Is it like knowledgeable about your Asian background or
I think, yeah, that's definitely a component, but I think more about systemic racism in America. And I think around 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement, it really like shot up. And I think that's when a lot of people kind of took it upon themselves to educate themselves. Like there's different topics like intersectionality and other just topics that people are aware of but don't necessarily like consider themselves to be super knowledgeable in.
I think I'm not super knowledgeable about race in general because I've never really needed to like research it or whatever because growing up here there wasn't much racism and I never really felt like I needed to know about these things. But like as we grow up, we are like surrounded by much more different types of people, and I really think I should start learning about it.
yeah, I agree too. Living around so many Asian people, it's really dumbed down the fact that I'm not knowledgeable on different races other than Asian Americans, because the only exposure I've had to that type of, I guess, information is through different articles, and whenever it appears on the news, it becomes a big deal. So, like the Black Lives Matter really opened my eyes to how important race is in our society.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like when I was younger, I think I was better with it, but like as I grown up and like became in a more like sheltered, I guess, in a way, community, yeah, I think I've forgotten a lot, and that's not really good. But yeah, I agree with like the whole Black Lives Matter movement. That really did show how like unfair our society can be in that regard.
I think those are all really great points about, I think, like what Avril initially brought up, that we've lived in a really privileged area for Asian Americans at least. And that's kind of, um, maybe blinded is a harsh word, but it's kind of shut off our eyes to the reality of how brutal like racism can actually be. So I think that that's a really good point. I think that's definitely something that we could discuss like later in this podcast.
I think my point kind of circles back, but I remember Aritri mentioning how people assume she's Indian even though she's Bangladesh. And I feel like that's definitely something I am weak on, like being able to like realize that there's a lot of diversity. Like you can't just like assume someone to be something. And that's the same for us. Like people like assume I'm Chinese or like Korean. So I feel like since I also go through those experiences, it should be important for me to like make sure I don't like do that to someone else as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess this kind of transition into our last topic. As young adults, what are some ways we can achieve the goal of eradicating systemic racism in our country?
Well, I feel like it'd be good to be a bit more like educated in a manner. Like the last time I remember learning about like world cultures is like in elementary and like my first year of middle school. And to be honest, I don't really remember much about that. But like in high school, world history is like mainly Eurocentric, so that was kind of sad, in my opinion.
Like in elementary school, my school had this thing called like international night where you would dress up as like from your own cultures and then share your food. And I got to like experience a lot of different cultures. But as we've grown up and then school's gotten more serious, there's kind of like I maybe no time to do those things, but I feel like those like learning about other people's cultures and experiencing them are really just as important as like learning something from academics.
Yeah, I agree with that. My brother's old school in Arizona, his high school did have like an event like that at the end of the year. And because his school is like super diverse, he was really lucky in that regard. Um, but yeah, that really like united the school as a community and like students put really their differences aside.
Yeah, I know our school, like uni, did a culture week this past year, I believe. And I think it was the first one, which is like kind of shocking. And I think this definitely goes back to Avril's point of how, like, in elementary school, I feel like they emphasize the idea of culture more and learning about it. But now it's become like whatever the AP classes are, that's what you learn. And like whatever
Yeah.
the GEs are, that's what you learn. So I'm glad that our school is starting to try to implement that more.
Yeah, I really liked Avril's point about educating in order to kind of like eradicate the systemic racism in our country. And I think that educating really is the first step to kind of learning like what the root of the actual problem is. And yeah, that's definitely something I hope to address later in this podcast. What manner do you think we should go about educating ourselves if the resources aren't super accessible to us? Because like I think what you guys were saying was that I guess like as we go into high school, it becomes more about sole academics, and that sometimes doesn't include as much about like the cultural or race aspect.
Yeah, in that regard, like even the education, like I don't think it has to be like a class, like take up your schedule. I think like more events, I guess. Like you know how we have Clubapalooza like once a semester? Maybe like that a bit, like if people have time, if they want to do it, because like it doesn't have to be like a harsh and like very demanding like way that we do it. It can be like just for fun and like just small fun events.
A community event is definitely the way to go because I think if it was just a class, many people would take the class for granted and wouldn't take it as seriously as if it was just like get together with fellow peers and you just talk about your race or you share different values and different aspects. So you get to learn different parts of different people's lives and how it's affected how they've grown up.
Something like sort of like a food fair could get people interested because like everyone's like, oh, this food tastes good. So they go home and they go and research it.
Universal love language.
Yeah. Go and learn more about it. Like they you need something to like open your curiosity, you know? And food's a really good way to do that, I think.
I think my point kind of like goes against what everyone's been saying, or like aligns more with where I'm currently at my life. But as a college student, you kind of have more freedom of what you want to study. And I feel like colleges are getting better at providing more classes that are about race or culture. And taking time to try to take those classes if you're interested in them would help you try to learn. But also, like you guys said, it doesn't have to be something academic. Like it could just be taking time to watch like a one short documentary about like a certain culture, if that's what you see on YouTube, or reading like an article. Just like the little things will usually build up and it'll just like help you be more knowledgeable.
Yeah, I like that. Like you can take your own classes about these cultures if you want to. But for me, I don't know about others, but I find it kind of hard to get interested in something if I like can't exactly relate to it. So like I wish there was some sort of way to get people interested in other cultures that aren't their own.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you found it informative, be sure to follow us to stay updated with our weekly releases. Let's race again next time!